tune is as familiar as the uniforms, but don't let that fool you. Despite appearances, these are not British Grenadiers, but Canadian facsimiles correct to the last gleaming toe cap. They're trooping the colour at Government House in Ottawa, and loyal Canadians are here for the occasion. As if to complete the illusion, the parade ground doubles as a cricket pitch. The Canadian Grenadiers circumnavigate the wicket. It is the 110th birthday of the Canadian Confederation, but as the band plays on, many wonder how much longer the maple leaf will fly over 10 united provinces. The symbol of the turmoil that may rend that union asunder is the fleur-de-lis of Quebec province. Jean-Baptiste Day in Montreal was a time for Quebec's 80% French-speaking population to assert their national identity. It is this avowal of their determination to be French that threatens Canada's union. The French language bill presently before the Quebec Parliament is seen by many as a step towards eventual separation and independence. Premier René Lévesque, a populist leader and declared separatist, explains the nationalist mood.
I've said before, dramatizing a little bit, that it was a little bit like a Rhodesian situation. In other words, let's say a speak white minority ruling over the natives. Let's say that was over dramatization, but I think it gives a good idea. For instance, the majority in Quebec, 80% and more, is French. And yet federal findings of a few years back, which have been confirmed recently, say that in the totem pole of incomes and promotion inside Quebec, I'm not talking about the whole of Canada, inside Quebec, apart from the really native population, in other words, the Eskimos and the Indians, the lowest people in that totem pole happen to be the 80% majority of French people in Quebec. Now, all of that is the background for Bill 1 and for what in English is called separatism, in other words, the option for self-government in Quebec.
Premier Lévesque and his ruling party Québécois look to the young for their strongest support. It is given willingly, but on Jean-Baptiste night, not everyone had time for politics. The language bill, known originally as Bill 1, but now since the government guillotine discussion as Bill 101, would make French the official language of the province. Because French would supersede English in the business world, the bill puts economic power into the hands of the French majority. Quebec is very, very French. To the visitor, the freeway symbolizes Quebec's difference. The trucks and the cars are pure North America, but the signs are French. The French in France have looked down on their transatlantic cousins, but they in turn have succeeded in preserving a style of life which owes more to Parisian chic than American brashness. In the tomato ketchup desert of North American cooking, Quebec is a gastronomic oasis. Here, amazingly, the hot dog does not reign supreme, and flavor is not something to be shaken from a bottle. The housewives prefer the market stall to the plastic-wrapped and plastic-flavored hygiene of the supermarket. It all adds up to a unique way of life whose preservation hardly seems to need the help of legislation, but the nationalist mood asserts the logic that the majority should control the purse strings. The French came to what is now the eastern seaboard of Canada in 1534. They named it New France, fought with the Indians, and prospered. As every schoolboy ought to know, their rule ended with the fall of Quebec City to the army of General Wolfe in 1759. Montreal students, in the guise of 18th century French troops, reenact for the tourists the Battle of Quebec. Their jaunty confidence reflects the complacency of the men who once defended the city. All through the summer of 1759, Wolfe's army lay siege to Quebec, but as winter approached, seemed no nearer to a conclusive victory. The French waited for the ice that would drive the British ships from the St. Lawrence. On September 13th, Wolfe struck. On the plains of Abraham, Wolfe won Canada for the British and lost his life. The Scots quickly put aside their bagpipes for ledgers. Today the names dominating Montreal's business community read like the roll call of the gathered clans. While the British prospered in the world of business, the French stuck to the land and their traditions. Part of that heritage is in the kitchen. Michel Nantel prepares Sunday lunch for a family gathering in a weekend retreat in the mountains outside Montreal. Husband Roger, a high-powered public relations consultant in the city, leaves the cooking in safe hands to offer homage to the wines. "3,000 miles of sea are spanned by a single Gallic gesture." The scene could hardly be more French, yet for all that they cling to tradition, do not French Canadians suffer an identity crisis?
I don't.
No.
But we have collectively, in the sense that for 2 centuries since the British conquest, we had to be professional schizophrenic. There weren't any problems for the whole period until 30 years ago that we French-speaking Canadians would be busy cutting down the trees, tilling the land, raising cows and pigs, while the Anglophone or the Anglo-Canadians were busy running the railroads. It's only when my forefathers came back to Montreal, which they settled themselves first, and had to get active on the economic and business front, that the interface happened, and then the conflict began. And it's only then, 30, 20 years ago, that people like, well, more than that, I would say 40 years ago, that my father realized that being called Nantel, he couldn't go past a certain point in industry and commerce and finance. He would train young people coming out of university who happened to be called Jones or Smith, and very quickly they would become his bosses. And he could not become a boss because of the fact that he was French. Now, let's not kid ourselves. There was discrimination through the use of language.
The drift from the land to the cities after the Second World War accelerated French discontent. Roger Nantel charts the progress of nationalism.
At the time of the conquest, most of the, I would say, literate or aristocratic elements of the French society of that period jumped back on their ships like rats and flew back to France or sailed back to France. What was left here was the clergy and the rural classes. Therefore, the scholarity or the education level of French Canadians at that time was, generally speaking, lower than what you would meet in any other well-constituted society. And French Canadians tended, and they were encouraged in that vein by the clergy. They were encouraged to stick to the land. Education was not necessarily a good thing. Being well educated was not necessarily an advantage. But it turned out to be the salvation, in a way, ironically enough. It turned out to be the salvation of French Canada, because we won the Battle of the Cradle. The battle of the cradle, the battle which I'm trying to take part of now.
The religion, the priest, and all that shit, you know, they kept us so within ourselves, you know, so much at the low level, you know, we couldn't. You know, it was bad, you know, like if somebody was a bright person that could go to a very good university outside, you know, that wasn't a very good image, you know, in your family if you were doing that. I'm not talking about, you know, 20 or 30 years ago, but it's much further than that. But it, you know, it kept on going like that.
But in the end, you're saying that those are the very things that in fact kept the community together.
Yes, it did.
In some ways, yeah.
In a very hostile environment. Climate, economic conditions, the land itself, and also the English, of course. Why shouldn't they have kept a certain kind of domination over French Canada, which they did?
Hostile?
Hostile in a very benevolent way, in a fatherly way. I wouldn't say that they considered French-speaking Canadians, also they were Catholics, that they would consider them as being an inferior race. British never do, never say so. But then by keeping the top jobs, keeping the top positions open only to English-speaking citizens, they kept actually kept control of the main levers of economy, the main political levers. They kept themselves at the steering wheel.
Our, call it middle class if you like, but our professional, white collar, and other new promotions of people are pushing for to them and to me, their rightful place. Without going into quotas, sure. If we are 81 thereabouts % of Quebec's population with no other homeland anywhere in the world, we're not going back to France, in the next ship, then the promotion has to be here. And it is a colonial setup which has to be broken. And it is being broken. And it has to be broken.
Can these elderly men and women celebrating the 75th anniversary of Montreal's Westmount Bowls Club really be Quebec's colonial masters? The truth is that for the first time in generations, the English minority feels seriously threatened. In the 60s, a wave of violence heralded the new nationalism. But the minority see the Parti Québécois as a greater threat than the bombers. They are convinced that the language bill alone will end the English domination of Montreal's business community. George Knox came to Montreal 31 years ago. Typically enough, he does not speak French. Today, he expresses the fear felt by many English-speaking businessmen.
Well, my company is an English company from Toronto. And
what does it do, precisely?
We're commercial stationers. And that means you're calling on a variety of people. My calls are limited in the fact that I can't speak French, so therefore I've got a state of the English companies who are less in here now than there were. I get along fine with French companies that I had been calling on, but now it's strange to go into a new company. To try and open a new company is very difficult unless you do speak French. Our company's over 100 years in business in Canada. Our products are well known down here. We sell a fair amount of it, but I can't broaden my base, as it were, as I would do if I'd come in here, or as I did come in here in 46. I could go almost any place and be accepted, and the English language was acceptable then. Today, some people are not accepting you as English.
And tomorrow,
speaking tomorrow, I say again, it'd be worse. It seems that way. That's what it's aiming at now. Whether that continues, could be a change of government, make that change over again. Let's hope so.
Westmount is the posh end of Montreal, but the folks who have lived comfortably on the hill are nervous of their future in the province. Many are getting out, heading west. It's boom time for removal firms who report business 40% up on last year. And for those who make the new pilgrimage, there is an appropriately named firm to transport their possessions. Many leave because the language bill will force their children into French schools. Only where at least one parent has been educated at an English school in Quebec province may a child have an English education. Douglas and Rosemary Devaney have 2 young children and are typical of the many among the minority who ponder their future in the province. I asked what it was that gave cause to their anxiety.
The whole language issue. Living in a province where I don't speak French, 80% of the population are French. It's got a government now that's saying they're going to separate it from Canada. And where does that leave me? Like, with the house, with the family, we just don't know what's going to happen next. The Bill 1 puts a fair number of restrictions, or has the potential of putting the restrictions on the English community, where we just, we won't be able to do some of the things that we want to do. One of the things is in education with the boys. We're lucky. The boys could go to English school because Rosemary was educated here in Quebec. But they couldn't go to French school and learn to speak French and then transfer to English school. That's not allowed. And yet, in order for them to stay in the province, I think they should be bilingual. But to send them to French school and have them unilingual French and then stuck in the province and not able to go anywhere in North America, that's not fair to them. So at that point, the thing that we've seriously looked at is leaving.
Do you fear, Doug, that however good the French that your sons learned, they would in fact end up as second-class citizens within the province to those who naturally speak the language.
Yeah, we've had friends that have gone out, a friend of ours has gone out for job applications, talked to counselors, job counselors, and they've basically said that no matter how bilingual you become, you're English and I can't place you. Simple as that.
I have a feeling you say most of what you're saying are more in sorrow than in anger, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. We've got an advantage in Quebec that the rest of North America doesn't have. We've got what we consider a more European type of culture, where you've got restaurants here that you don't have in the rest of North America, the whole milieu. We've got two cultures that we could enjoy. The English are beginning to wake up and say, hey, the only way I can enjoy that culture is if I'm bilingual. And it's good. But you're not prepared to do that if you're going to be, if you're frightened that you're going to get insulted or get into an embarrassing situation, or if the whole province separates, then it's gone.
Or lose your job.
That's right, or lose your job. And that's a potential as well.
If it separates, you would certainly go.
Oh, yes. Leave Quebec as soon as possible.
Rosemary, would you be very sad to leave?
I wouldn't. I've got a bit of a spirit of adventure, and I could be happy going anywhere at any given time. I think it's tragic if we have to leave not wanting to.
Well, the one thing we can say is that as long as, in good faith, the English-speaking minority in Quebec allows for the full promotion of French rights, and that means taking over a dominant position in our homeland. There's no intention whatsoever in Bill 1 or elsewhere of, any kind of eradication or pushing them outside like new loyalists, 200 years later. But it's up to them to make up their minds also that they will accept the evolution in Quebec. In other words, that they will be a minority, just like our people outside in Canada, throughout the rest of Canada, are just minorities, more or less respected, and to be frank, less respected than the English have ever been in Quebec.
I suppose the greatest fear is in the field of education, isn't it? In the insistence that unless a parent has been educated in English in Quebec, their children must be educated in French. Quite simply believe that means second-rate education, don't they?
Well, there is a possibility of some sort of reciprocity. Supposing other provinces decide that they can do as well as Quebec for their own French minorities, as well as we do for our English minorities, maybe there is an opening there for arrangements, but it would have to be reciprocal.
500 employees were sacked when this steel plant shut down last June. The derelict buildings and idle rolling mills are typical of Quebec's precarious economy. Unemployment throughout the province is running at over 10%. In some country areas, it accounts for 1 in 4 of the workforce. Quebec reflects Canada's economic malaise, but the language bill and the moves to separatism add to business doubts. An exodus of English-dominated firms to Toronto is predicted when the bill becomes law. The government argues that the language issue must be settled to create the climate to tackle the economy. It is not an argument that appeals much to Pierre Desmarais, Liberal politician and president of the Quebec Council of Businessmen.
No way. The particular Quebec ministers do think so, but they haven't been in the field. They haven't been in the real life. They're mostly academics. They come from government, and they don't know our capital is volatile. And from my point of view, as head of Le Conseil du Patronat du Québec, we've seen businesses go away. We've seen investors not investing in Quebec, and we've seen investors waiting to see what the climate will be. But when this is taking place, the economic climate is getting worse.
Robert Dean is leader of the Quebec Car Workers Union. Although of English stock, he believes the language bill must be given priority.
Quebec is French. Those who function in Quebec have to be prepared to operate their plants, their offices in the French language. And I think that once that question is clear, then many industries who have been hesitating will go ahead with their plans, because the company that makes soup or automobiles and who sells them in Quebec by millions and millions of dollars is going to continue to want to make soup or make automobiles once he knows what the ground rules are in Quebec.
Parti Québécois was elected on the platform of good government and eventually separation. And they think that the promotion of French, the way they are promoting it, is their #1 priority. But the time that we are losing now, which will be about 6 months to a year, and maybe until the next election, we'll never get it back. Unemployment here in October, November 1977 will be in the 12, 13, or 15%, with mostly young people between 20 and 25 having no jobs. And this is a very serious matter, much more serious than the promotion of French the way it is done now.
I think the people who've done the most crying since the 15th of November and against Bill 1 are not the people who take the investment decisions. General Motors has never said anything about the French language, and right across the road there, they're investing $36 million to transform their plant for a new type of model, which is one of the best sellers in North America. Other major companies since the 15th of November have announced major investment plans. Some of them feared that the Parti Québécois was going to be a very rampant, out-and-out and radical socialist party. And once the moderate social democratic position of the Parti Québécois was clearly established, other major companies have announced major investment plans too.
Not everyone shares Robert Dean's optimism. Forecasts of economic ruin must ring in the ears of the Quebec government. They are ignored. Blackmail is how such gloomy prognostications are regarded by Premier Lévesque.
Well, the blackmail is, I think, par for the course. It's more or less always tied to bread and butter. In other words, you're going to go down the drain, you're going to practically disappear economically. I've even, to go to the absolute absurd extreme, I've even read letters coming in over the last few months talking about the Americans maybe being so mad at us that they'd reverse the St. Lawrence or things like that. No, but it goes to crazy extremes like that. I'm not talking about Mr. Trudeau or the federal establishment. They keep it to bread and butter. In other words, the argument to the stomach. The minority people, which has always been colonial from the word go, because we were a French colony, then a British colony, and now we're an inner colony, 1 province out of 10 in a dominantly English country. Colonial people, which has always been in a colonial setup, is supposed to be, and usually is for some time, a good target for that kind of blackmail, because it means a long habit of dependence on others for many decisions, including investment decisions, things like that. But I think the change in Quebec, in the Quebec French majority, and the new generation shaping up, is sufficient now that, like other national entities throughout the world, we can resist the blackmail.
There are other ways in which the federal government can hit back at the Quebec separatists. This year's Canada Day marked the 110th anniversary of Confederation. The government spent $3.5 million on a huge birthday party which plugged the theme of national unity. The grandest celebrations took place in the capital city of Ottawa. Among those gathered for the celebrations, it seemed as if the government had spent its money well.
It's a great day.
Why is it a great day?
Because it's for all people from Quebec and the other province. It's the same country. Canada is the great.
Are you French?
Yes.
What do you think of the...
From Quebec.
What do you think of the separatists?
It's not here today.
To me, means togetherness, and it means that it gives a chance to Canada to show that they belong with the rest of the world as an individual country, and they can stand on their own 2 feet. I've got a French-Canadian wife, and I'm English-Canadian, so I think, to me, provinces belong together as one big country, and I'm proud to be a Canadian and wouldn't want to be in any other country.
What does this day mean to you?
Well, it means togetherness and unity of all of Canada, not only other provinces. I mean, the 10 provinces.
Do you fear at all that this may be Canada's last big united birthday party?
I see the possibility, but not the probability.
What do you think of the separatists?
Well, I feel that some of their demands may be legitimate, but I think perhaps they're shooting for the moon in order that they may hit the top of the telephone poles.
Do you fear at all that this may be Canada's last united birthday party or going towards that?
I would hope not. I think there certainly is hope for salvaging a united country, maybe under different terms than we've seen in the past, but I think that Canada as a country has a good many years ahead of it.
Federal Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau has spent much of his political life arguing that the interests of Quebec's French Canadians can best be advanced within a united Canada. But when the party is over, the issue will not have gone away. The Quebec government has refused to water down its language bill to allay the fears of the minority. The move to separatism appears to have created its own momentum. Trudeau knows that to make concessions to Quebec would be to sow discontent among the remaining English-speaking provinces. But for the moment, the show goes on. It just wasn't the Prime Minister's day. As he beat a damp retreat, his only solace may have been in the thought that there is something very English about rain in high summer. Despite the rain, it was a glorious party. But in Quebec, attitudes harden.
We shall have in Quebec, in about 2 years, a referendum, where a question will be asked, a very simple question. Do you, as a Quebecer, want Quebec to be autonomous? Or don't you want Quebec to be autonomous? I, for one, not for myself, because I shall lose for a couple of years, economically speaking. I shall have to pay a price for it. But I know that that little girl there will benefit if I answer yes to that referendum, and I shall answer yes to that referendum.
For those who share Roger Nantel's views, the language bill is but the first step towards independence. It will take more than a cup of kindness to prevent some old acquaintances leaving the fold. In Quebec, they dance to a different tune.